On 5 News, the Brexit battle reaches the highest court in the land. A historic hearing in front of 11 judges to decide whether Parliament should be consulted. Protests outside as the court hears some people involved in the case had been threatened with violence. Also, a tidal wave of victims and new allegations by the day. Former footballers who were abused as children set up a special trust to help others.
We want to fight for justice. We do want justice because we all went through a terrible ordeal.
The report, which says Britain is becoming more divided as it becomes more diverse. And a graceful landing for the woman they call the human swan after a 4,500-mile adventure. Hello and welcome to 5 News. I'm Sian Williams. The most senior judges in the land are deciding one of the most important constitutional cases in decades. Who should start the Brexit process? Well, the public voted to leave, and that's not being questioned. What is how it'll all begin and who triggers the all-important Article 50. The government says only its ministers can do it. Opponents say MPs and peers should be consulted. Well, the High Court agreed with them, but now the battle's been taken to the UK's highest court to decide who's right. Our chief correspondent, Tessa Chapman, reports.
You don't usually see protests outside the Supreme Court, but then this is no normal hearing. Brexit matters to people on both sides. Inside this building, all 11 justices of the Supreme Court must consider who has the power to decide how we leave the EU and trigger Article 50. Gina Miller brought the case last month and won. The High Court agreed the government couldn't do it without the approval of Parliament. It provoked such anger she received death threats. In a rare move before today's appeal by the government got underway, this warning from the President.
Anyone who communicates such threats or abuse should be aware that there are legal powers designed to ensure that access to the courts is available to everybody.
And so started the fight back. It's the government's case that Theresa May can use prerogative powers to trigger Article 50 by herself. Her lawyers say Parliament had their chance to have a say back when the referendum was called.
The triggering of Article 50, we say, will not be an exercise of prerogative power on a whim or out of a clear blue sky. It is the logical conclusion of a process in which Parliament has been fully and consciously involved, a process in which Parliament resolved to put a clear and decisive question.
This is an incredibly complex case, and experts say it needs to be. We're in uncharted territory.
Article 50 has never been used. Obviously, leaving the EU is a dramatic thing. The question of whether the government can leave the EU solely exercising its prerogative powers or whether Parliament has to approve that in legislation is simply a brand new and enormous legal question that's obviously never come up before in this country or any other country.
And it's playing out under the watchful eyes of voters.
Should totally have a vote, because at the end of the day, it's not one woman that should have the control over it all.
Parliament should be able to vote, because it's an important matter.
She should be allowed to push it through, I agree, because we've already voted, so everyone's done what they said they'd do.
At the end of the day, it was a referendum, right? The people decided what they want to do, so therefore, why should it be overruled?
The judges are considering this case knowing they have to distance themselves from the political storm surrounding Brexit. Some of them have come under scrutiny from the press on a level rarely seen before, but this is not a political judgment, but a legal one, and they have a duty to remain impartial.
The referendum was hardly mentioned in court today, but this is one of the most significant constitutional battles in recent history, and everyone knows Brexit is right at its heart.
And a battle it is. Let's talk to Tessa at the Supreme Court now. Tessa, what more did we learn about the arguments on both sides today?
Well, the government hasn't finished its case yet. We're expecting to hear the end of that tomorrow. And then we will hear from the claimant, Gina Miller, followed by other interested parties, including the Welsh, Northern Irish and Scottish governments. This is an incredibly complex case. We've got 4 days of hearings here, and then we are expecting the judgment to be reserved, so we will hear that decision sometime in January. To put it in context, the judges have 24,000 pages to look through, so they're going to have a very busy Christmas.
They are, and it's emotive too. We can hear the protest still going on behind you. When we do get that ruling, what happens then?
If the government wins, then Theresa May will be able to press ahead, as she has said, and trigger Article 50 before the end of March. It's if she loses that things get a little more interesting. There is some suggestion she would try and push a bill through Parliament very quickly, perhaps just a two-line bill to get MPs to agree that she can trigger Article 50. But if MPs decide to force amendments, things could take an awful lot longer. You can see why this four-day hearing is so significant.
Tessa, thanks. Lawyers involved in the sexual abuse scandal in football say there has been a tidal wave of victims coming forward in recent days. Some of the allegations are against people who are still involved in the game. Today, two former players who say they were abused have set up an independent trust promising to fight for justice for survivors. Peter Lane has the details.
Just days after waiving their right to anonymity to tell their stories, another huge step for Andy Woodward and Steve Walters, launching the Offside Trust to support other players and their families coming forward with allegations of abuse.
I want to thank my mum and dad, who both are dying and they're dead proud of me. And I also want to thank, every individual, every member of the public that have supported me and made this happen, because this is going to change people's lives, and I can't thank you all enough.
It's the best thing I've ever done now. As I said to Andy before, I carried a 100-ton weight on my back for years and years, and that's gone now. There's a little light at the end of the tunnel. I can see that now.
The lawyer helping launch the trust says new allegations are arriving all the time, some relating to people still working within football.
Yes, I think it could only be described as a tidal wave of victims coming forward. People have been contacting the players themselves, who are directors of the trust, for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's absolutely clear that this problem is alive and very much still in the game.
Where victims want to, the new trust is liaising with police. 20 different police forces are now investigating historical child sex abuse allegations within football. Other former players like Matthew Monaghan were at today's press conference and have also waived their right to anonymity, not least to help others.
It's a relief, It's like Stevie said before, you feel like 100-ton weight's been lifted off your shoulders. Because I've always struggled about talking about it, but this is helping me, and hopefully it can help others as well,
And Mark Williams has only just started telling his story. This is the first day he's spoken on camera.
When I come here today, it's really, really tough. I played Premier League internationally, but if I can just make it okay for a child to come out and I'll find the courage to say, Dave spoke out, this is fine, it's okay, we can speak.
Doing this together and with their families' help, the players want justice, of course, but want to offer a lifeline of support for footballers past and present as this story grows and grows. Peter Lane, 5 News.
A British woman has been stabbed to death while working for a tour company in Lapland. The woman was a member of a team that organised Christmas-themed excursions to the Finnish region. Lapland police say her boyfriend is being questioned on suspicion of her killing. Parts of the UK are struggling to cope with the unprecedented pace and scale of immigration, and it's causing worrying levels of segregation. Well, those are the findings of a government-backed report which accuses authorities of not tackling some of the problems for fear of being called racist. Well, it's made a series of recommendations, including looking at housing policy, introducing projects to boost cohesion and funding for more English classes in the community. It's also suggested that school children should be taught about British values, such as the respect for the rule of law, democracy, equality and tolerance. And it proposes that new immigrants swear an oath of integration when they arrive into the country. Well, Dominic Reynolds has been to Small Heath in Birmingham to find out what people there think.
The names of the businesses, the clothes people are wearing, even the styles of the sweets. They all come from India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. But we're in suburban Birmingham, 5,000 miles away. It's communities like these that need to be better integrated into British culture, so says the Casey report. Behind the sweet shop counter, Pervez agrees. Muslim cultures, he says, are mixing less than they're used to here with non-Muslims. Would you like this to be a more mixed community, more different people?
Yeah, I like.
Why?
Because we get the more information, more learning, more experience.
If
I go another place, maybe I learn more things.
One of today's recommendations is more money for English classes. But cousins Mehibur and Humayun say it won't make any difference to people who don't speak English already.
I think government is doing enough for the community.
So they don't need to do anything more?
No, nothing more. Look, if you are learn English, so many local schools in the evening.
So you think the opportunities are already there?
Opportunities are there.
But people just need to do it?
They do it. They are lazy.
In a report all about delicate subjects, perhaps the most sensitive is gender equality. And it suggests women in places like this are encouraged to follow customs which stand opposed to progressive Britain. But that isn't how Rashila sees it. Are there repressive attitudes here towards women?
From men. So all the culture do. Not only the Muslim, all the culture.
You think it's everywhere?
Everywhere.
People might say it's not as obvious.
English as well, French as well, everywhere. So you can't blame only one culture.
Travel agent Mac agrees with the Casey review that mixing more means better opportunities, but he thinks his community is already doing it.
I think now society's changed so much. I don't think traditional is so much respected. Everybody wants now be the UK type of lifestyle.
It sounds like you almost regret the mixing up that's happened. You regret the integration.
I don't regret it at all. I don't regret it at all because for me it's changed my life for the better.
At the heart of the Casey review is the idea that communities should follow so-called British values. It may be that people here in Small Heath aren't the only ones who might struggle to say what that means. Dominic Reynolds, 5 News in Birmingham.
Coming up on 5 News. Celebrations in Italy as its Prime Minister loses a referendum and then quits. And we meet the woman who travelled like this all the way from Russia to help swans. We'll see you after the break. Hello and welcome back. You're watching 5 News. With the Brexit vote and Donald Trump's victory, 2016 has been quite the year for political upheaval. Now it's Italy's turn, with the Prime Minister's plans to reform the country's constitution heavily defeated in a referendum. It could cause yet more turmoil for the EU, but as Leila Hayes explains, the result has left many Italians overjoyed.
Enough now, they sing. Supporters of the No campaign delighted to have won Italy's referendum. It was a staggering defeat. Goodbye, they shout, to the country's Prime Minister.
Per me, una grandissima sensazione.
For me, it's a great feeling, this woman says. It's a sign that this country can do it. This has been a victory for the people, says this woman. Matteo Renzi had staked his future on a yes vote, vowing to quit if voters rejected his plans to reform the constitution. After the polls closed, he announced he'd be keeping that promise.
Non siamo stati convincenti, mi dispiace.
We have not been convincing, he said. I am sorry. Italy woke up this morning to political turmoil. The country is already facing a banking crisis, and early indications show almost 60% of voters supported the No campaign. Renzi's resignation means the EU will now lose a key ally. For some, this is seen as yet another vote against the establishment. But others say what's happened in Italy is not the same as Brexit.
In Italy, there is actually very limited appetite for leaving the EU. There is quite strong appetite on part of some parties to have a referendum on the euro. But it's important again to remember that actually a referendum on the membership of the euro is illegal according to Italy's constitution. So the constitution would have to be changed beforehand, which would require either a huge parliamentary majority, which is unlikely to be secured by anyone, or another referendum.
Viva l'Italia, in bocca al lupo a tutti noi.
Matteo Renzi, at 39, was the country's youngest prime minister. Europe now waits to see who will replace him and what that will mean for Italy's future. Leila Hayes, 5 News.
At least 36 people are now known to have been killed in a fire that ripped through a warehouse party in California on Friday night. The names of some of the victims are beginning to emerge, and as firefighters search through the rubble, they say they expect to find even more bodies. Well, the cause of the fire isn't known, but officials have opened a criminal investigation. Olivia Kinsley reports.
These are the smiling faces of some of those who died on Friday night. The victims named so far were all in their 20s and 30s, and Oakland police say a 17-year-old also lost their life.
We have located and recovered 36 victims. Of the 36, 11 have been positively identified.
They expect to find more bodies in the wreckage, which is now dangerously unstable. Work has been halted there today as a wall was threatening to collapse. Up to 100 people are believed to have been inside when the fire began late on Friday night. Investigators still don't know the cause, but they now believe they've found the spot where it started, towards the back of the building. This is what it used to look like inside, a wooden structure, the walls lined with furniture. Criminal investigators have been called in amid claims that there were only 2 exits and that parts of the building had been divided into living quarters against the terms of the lease.
This is a very large, not only incident, but a tragedy. We have a lot of answers to provide to families and to provide to our community.
In the coming hours and days, more families in Oakland will get the dreadful confirmation that their loved ones aren't coming home. Olivia Kinsley, 5 News.
Donald Trump has caused another diplomatic incident with China in another outburst on Twitter. In a series of tweets, the US president-elect criticised the country's military and monetary policies. It follows his controversial phone call last week with the president of Taiwan, a region that China refuses to recognise as an independent nation. The floods caused by Storm Desmond last winter were the most extreme ever recorded in the UK. A report published a year on compared it with the devastating flooding in 1947. On this day last year, 13 inches of rain fell in 24 hours in the Lake District. And the disgraced former president of FIFA, Sepp Blatter, has lost his appeal against a 6-year ban from football. The 80-year-old was handed the punishment last year for making what was described as a disloyal payment. Mr. Blatter says he will accept the decision. Now, when Sasha Dench wanted to find out why numbers of swans had fallen drastically, she decided on a novel solution. Have a look at this. Strapping herself into a motorised paraglider, she took to the air and followed their migration route all the way from the Russian Arctic. After 10 weeks, several thousand miles and more than a few mishaps, today she landed back on British soil. And Ruth Liptrot was there to greet her.
After 4,500 miles, this was the moment that the woman known as the human swan touched down on British soil. And as landings go, thankfully, it was more of a graceful swan dive than a nosedive. Sasha Dench from the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust has been recreating the migration route of the Bewick swan on a motorised paraglider. She travelled from the Russian tundra to the UK to work out why its numbers are declining.
We needed to find out what was going wrong for the Bewick swan, and what better way than to try and fly it as a swan does, to fly at the same height, the same speed, and go all the same places they do, but also to speak to all the people along the flyway, everyone that we need help from in order to save them.
In 1995, there were around 29,000 Bewicks in the UK. By 2010, that had dropped to around 18,000, and the numbers are still falling.
What's going wrong?
Well, the loss of wetlands all along the flyway, they just have less and less places to go. They're also suffering from illegal hunting. About a third of the birds that are living today have got shot in their body, so they've been shot at somewhere, which is an incredible number.
But Sasha faced almost as many difficulties as the swans. On day one, she had to be rescued by Russian reindeer herders when her motor failed. And at other times, she struggled with turbulence sickness.
And I'm having to admit defeat today because
I feel so sick.
But she carried on regardless, and today she became the first woman to cross the channel in a motorised paraglider.
I think I was probably grinning from the halfway mark. At the halfway mark, it's the point where, you know, I couldn't actually glide to either side. So if anything went wrong with the motor, I'd be in the water. But we had a nice tailwind, and I had the confidence we were going to make it.
Next week, she'll be taking a petition calling for better protection for the Buicks to Downing Street. After that, like the Swans, she'll be staying put for the winter. Ruth Liptrot, 5 News.
Before we go, Matt's just joined us to tell us what's coming up on 5 News tonight. Hello there.
Hi, Sean. We'll have more on that report at 6:30. Into integration, I'll be talking to the report author Louise Casey live here in the studio. Also, how much money do you spend on Christmas presents for the kids? We're talking about a new survey that suggests the best value for money is low-tech gifts like balls, hula hoops and frisbees. Sounds like the 70s. But is the pester power for high-tech presents like computer games just too much to resist? We'll be talking to 2 parenting experts, and me makes 3. We want to know what you think as well. How much is too much to spend on your presents? Let us know via Facebook. Search for C5 News there, Sean.
Nothing wrong with the 70s, I'll have you know.
Good
toys. Banner ball, it's all they need. Thank you, Matt. That's it for now. Claire Nazir has the weather next. I'll see you again tomorrow at 5. Matt's back at 6:30. Bye for now.